Good evening. Welcome to Haunted Happenings with the Taunton Paranormal Group. I'm your host, Jake.
And I'm Scott.
Tonight we have three members of a fellow paranormal group. I'd like to welcome Erik Kucheris, Lucy Rodriguez, and Jom O'Rourke, members of Psona Paranormal Research. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to hear us.
It's nice to have you here.
Oh, might as well start right off. Erik, can you tell us a little bit how you got into the paranormal?
It all started probably when I was about 7 years old. And as a young child, I always felt that something always seemed to be around me. I felt senses. I was too young to understand really what was going on up until maybe the age of 11. Ended up going to a house in Adams where my parents were friends with these people out there, and they had a younger son, maybe a couple of years younger than I was. I remember driving up to the home. It was just this spooky type of feel to it. I can still see the street to this day. And so as we're driving up to the home, something didn't want me to go in that home. And I think that's kind of where it really started. But as time went on, we went into the home, and I started having these feelings that somebody was watching me. I started asking the kid, I said, can we go around the house and look for ghosts? So that's kind of how it all started.
You kind of had an interest even back then.
Right. But a big part of it was my sister. And she's an astrologer, professional astrologer, and a Reiki master as well. And so she, I think, got me involved with all of this as I was growing up. And she always felt that I had some kind of senses, just didn't know how to use them. So as a few years went by, my father eventually became an ordained minister, which guided me spiritually, I think. And then we ended up going through a situation where my grandmother had died, and I, to this day, believe I saw an apparition of either my grandmother or someone right after her death, full body apparition, but it was a young woman. I can still remember the look to this day. She was wearing a big brim hat, dressed in some kind of a long dress down to the floor, and it looked like this person was like holding flowers and just walking from one end of the room to the other end of the room and then just disappeared.
Is this the same? You were 7 at this time?
No, I was older at this point.
Yeah.
I was older at this point. I was probably about 15 when that happened.
Wow.
And there was another time when, after my father had become ordained as a minister, the pastor that ordained him, he was not totally for my father becoming ordained. And so my father was driving past the cemetery after the pastor had passed away, and my father believes that he heard him laughing coming from the back seat, that it was him.
Really?
We had issues of curtains closing in the living room, and we thought maybe that was him as well. My mother always used to leave the curtains open in the living room. She had all these plants. You couldn't even get to the curtains. She had all these plants. She wanted the sunlight. And then eventually I was downstairs in the basement, came upstairs, and I said to my father, I said, well, why are the curtains closed? My mother had gone to work, and he looks over and he says, I don't know. And I said, did Mom close them? Did you close them? No, none of us closed them. So it was another instance that kind of got me into getting into the paranormal. But it then came probably when I was more of a teenager, and then in my 20s when I really got into it, before all the TV shows even kicked in, and started doing some personal investigations on homes, and then eventually got into another paranormal group for a short period. Didn't like their ethics, so I decided to just move away from that and start this group.
Oh, sometimes you're better off.
Yeah.
All right, Lucy, I guess we'll ask the same question. What drove you?
Well, it started at my parents' house when we moved. I used to hear footsteps, see shadows. So I was always intrigued, so I used to ask my mother, and of course the Portuguese always keep everything hush-hush.
Oh, yeah.
So she told me afterwards, because of course I kept aggravating her, so I was always intrigued with the spiritual world. And then also, if someone close would pass away. Like a good example was like my grandmother. She was in the Azores. My mother was watching her, and she was sick. And I called my mother. I'm like, yeah. I was like, you should be close to her because she's not going to last that long, probably tonight. And she passed away that night. And I just saw her. I saw, like, I didn't even go because, of course, I couldn't go to the Azores, but I told my mother exactly what she was wearing and everything. She didn't tell me what she was wearing, but I saw what she was wearing.
Right.
Same thing with my grandfather. When he passed away, like, I was actually at work, and my mother's like, oh, he's in good spirits because he died of lung cancer. I'm like, I was like, he's just getting his last one. I was like, he's probably going to go tonight, and it happened. So, so that always, like, got to me, and then I've had a couple of episodes of my brother-in-law when he has, he brings certain entities, and I can sense it. And then, I always go through the blessing and stuff of the house if something happens or whatever.
So he has he has attachments.
Yeah, he does have attachments. And it's usually, I always tell him when he's in his weakest moment, when he's vulnerable, I always have to, like, remind him, you need to be strong because, when you go somewhere, you bring attachments with you, and then sometimes they're not of the kind.
Yeah, this is true. Very
so,
true.
He's come a long way. I mean, he hasn't had that many attachments, so I've always had that senses. And even when I went to Puerto Rico, my oldest, who's now 20, he was 3 at the time, he was playing by himself, and my husband's like, oh, what is he doing? I was like, he's playing with a child. He's like, no, he's not. I was like, oh, yeah, he is. And then, lo and behold, he asked his mother, and they had a little child who used to be around the house, which was a little spirit, and he was playing with the kid and having a conversation, a little baby talk.
Wow.
So, yeah, and then I joined Psona because my cousin's in Psona, and we started talking. He's like, you should join. I'm like, yeah, I'm all for it. And I'm also very spiritual. I got Reiki 2 certified. I do aromatherapy, herbalism. I try to, ground myself and try to keep a zen, because it's always better to be zen when you go into stuff like that. So
Always trying to keep our group, I think, at this point, as of late, spiritual with a lot of what's going on.
Right.
yeah, and I try to give them little hints in there. Even when we went to our last case, the owner, she was a little on the edgy side, so over the phone I would calm her down and tell little things to do, so she grounds herself and gets back into mode, so you don't feed.
Right. Yeah, that's a biggie.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Jim, how about you?
Probably like Eric. Mine started when I was about 5, 6 years old. So I grew up in Brockton. And about 5, 6 years old, didn't really understand what paranormal entities were and so forth. And I remember seeing this apparition of a man, turn of the century, so either late 1800s, early 1900s, kind of walk up in front of me, probably about 6, 7 feet away, up the stairs and into my brother's room. And ever since then, I started paying more attention to things around us. And fortunately or unfortunately, we lived right next to a cemetery.
Yeah.
So we used to pick up some weird activities, and we were all affected by it one way or another. I used to have this woman. I couldn't see her, but I knew it was a woman because she was very gentle, and she'd come and sort of caress me or stroke my arm if I was sick or laying in bed late at night. And so fast forward, my wife and I got married, and we moved into a house that was very opposite of that, where it was when I was a kid, it was a little bit more comforting.
Right.
Things that you didn't quite understand, but you knew you weren't always alone.
Right.
In the other house, it was much more sinister and so forth. And so about a year ago, my wife, who's also part of the Psona team, saw Eric looking for new members, and that's basically how it all started from there.
I find it very interesting. It seems like a lot of the people in this field, either they have experiences around the same age, it begins 7, 8 years old, or have had things happen that just kind of guided each individual to research this or become more involved in it. I think that it's amazing that it almost always 7, 8, 9 years old is where it really starts. It's interesting. Eric, when did Psona begin? Who founded it? Some specifics about the group for the viewers.
The group was founded August of 2010. Really, we set the date for October 2010. I'll correct myself on that. August is when we really started it, but then founded it officially to October. And I founded the group along with Joseph Ciccarelli out of Rhode Island. He's the co-founder as well. And we started as a group of 3. There was another individual involved and is no longer involved with the group, but due to busy times, it was too much. So we did the typical little things, hop in the cemeteries, just to start going. We didn't really have equipment at that point. The group that I was in prior, or before this Psona group, we ended up, or I should say, I didn't have the equipment, but they had the equipment. And so, unfortunately, when I started this group, it was a little difficult. So it took a little time, but it went full blast almost immediately.
Right.
We were getting phone calls to go into homes, residential homes, and then we had the chance to go to Rose Island Lighthouse, which definitely was very interesting. We had exclusive rights for 2 nights, 3 days.
Wow.
It was 4 of us on the island. It was myself, Joe, and 2 other members, Sarah and Nelson. Sarah being our case manager / historical researcher, and Nelson being our tech manager. So all 4 of us went out there, and we went all across the island, and
Wow.
it was a great time.
Sounds we haven't been there, but I've heard a lot about it. It sounds very interesting. Love to do that.
You touched a little bit on the type of cases you guys do, but you can touch a little bit more on maybe your goal as a paranormal group.
I think as far as the group, and I think I speak for all of us, we're doing this to help residential homeowners mostly. I think that's what we're focused in on. And
It's important.
we're not about hopping cemeteries, as I mentioned originally, but it's about helping people, and especially as of late. And we're looking for guidance from other people, other individuals as well, to help us along through the process to get more educated. And there's a lot we don't know, and we'll admit to that.
I think that goes across the board, and I think for people to acknowledge that is important, because we all learn something, at each case. At least I think we should. I mean, there's so much out there, and to network like we're doing, and you're doing, benefits the entire paranormal field.
Right.
I don't think there's anybody out there with all the answers.
No.
And if there is, please give me a
You're
call.
in trouble. You're in trouble.
I mean,
Something I just learned recently too is, we used to say, well, let's try to prove or try to get proof of what's going on. As somebody once said, that it's not really proof, you're just gathering evidence. So it's not really proof that's what you're really looking for. It's just, there is no proof in the paranormal world, I think.
Right. A lot of theories. A lot of theories. I think that there's some good theories out there. Unfortunately, there's some not so good. And, to try and separate one from the other as a homeowner, when you call in, hopefully they're calling somebody who's reputable, who's not going to try and deceive them. Obviously there's some really great groups out there, and unfortunately there's quite the opposite we've found too.
it's not like there's a listing in the yellow pages that says paranormal groups, you know. So I mean, you're really looking word of mouth, Facebook, social media, stuff like that. So I mean,
and I think it's much more gratifying to ourselves, in the field, to be able to do residential and help people than just scope in different places. I mean, we actually have some in the family that they're not part of a group, but they'll hop, like Denver illegally or wherever it may be, just for the thrill. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I don't think that's ever been one of our issues. Is just for the excitement of it. So it's nice that you have groups like yourself and others out there that really try to help out people who are experiencing, whether it be paranormal or otherwise, something of a negative nature, to help them out.
And we're very cautious before we even go into a home. We do the initial interview. We try to do the historical research as much as possible, and then we go in to do the investigation. But we also like to go back a second time because you just don't seem to have everything up front on the first one.
Right.
And try to correlate things with the history of the home. And that's when it gets interesting, is sometimes the second time around.
Yeah, well, we've talked, both of, we just met, but for the client themselves, the first time you speak with them, you're not necessarily getting all the facts.
Right.
Even the second time,
Exactly.
so it's nice that you go back and as many times as it takes.
Right. And sometimes not having the facts can get you in trouble.
Absolutely.
Yes. And we try to give them, as much information for them to feel comfortable.
Right.
Because most of them are scared and they don't know what to do. So we try to give them some answers. We don't have all the answers, but we try to give them as many answers as we can.
Right. Well, just that alone to make the initial call, because that when they're dealing with it, at least it seems this way anyway, most people, if they're sincere, there's a stigma that goes with it. They're nuts or they're imagining things or whatever it may be. But to find a group that's legitimate and will listen and not judge them, which is very important.
Right.
And they're scared of that because some of our clients will say, I don't want you to think I'm crazy.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want you to think that, I'm lying to you. This really happens to us. And they're scared. And we try to, comfort them and say, we know you're not going crazy. We know it happens. We're just going to see what is really happening, what may not be happening. We try to debunk things as we go along the way, too.
The majority of the people, they're watching TV. And that's what scares them.
Yeah.
They don't really realize what's behind the scenes.
Right.
And that's important to know and to try to educate them as well.
Right. It's not, okay, we're going in and 20 minutes later you've got the evidence.
Oh, yeah.
Everything's fine.
A lot of clients don't realize that it's not a 42-minute program.
Exactly.
Where everything happens in that 42 minutes.
Well, 42 hours.
42 hours, 420 hours, whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Have you guys come upon any demonic cases?
We are. We don't want to get into it too much at the moment, but we are working on a particular case presently, and we're still trying to go through the findings, and we're trying to work things out. Whether or not it's demonic, don't know. But and I'm certainly not going to say that. Absolutely not going to say that. Is there something dark there? Possibly. Is it just somebody that had a bad day back many years ago in the 1800s? Is just so no, we've never physically dealt with demonic cases, and this is what we're learning about now, and we certainly kind of like to avoid them if at all possible. But you don't know what's going to happen when you walk into a home. You really don't know.
That's
you have to be prepared for
right.
it, and it's something we all learned on this current case that we're working on. We've been working on this since August of last year, so we're almost a full year into it now.
Yeah, that's what you said there about exactly the type of case it was and not knowing what you're walking into. That's a major thing that I think people should know. There's a lot of, I don't even want to talk about the groups right now, but people that are interested in doing this sort of thing that aren't necessarily ready for it. And they'll run into a place, just like Paul Dever or whatever, even though I don't think there's anything at Dever. They'll go into a house, for the thrill, and they don't know what's in there. It could be something sinister or, even a malevolent human spirit. And I think Father Bob had said it, if you don't know what you're getting yourself into, you could literally be in for a hell of a time,
Exactly.
You got to be careful.
Exactly.
And that comes down to preparation too. And when we spoke, I know you guys said you do some protections, which is awesome, before and after. What do you guys do for protections yourself?
Well, in this last case, which was just recent, I ended up going to La Salette in Attleboro. And I don't physically go to church, even though my father was a minister. I as a child, I certainly went to church every Sunday. I had no choice. But, when he passed in 1996, and I think after I got married, it just kind of faded away, unfortunately. And, life gets busy.
Yes.
And, I'm also into classic cars, so football, Sunday car shows, that's, especially when they start at 8 o'clock in the morning. So, but, I don't know. I kind of forgot where I'm going with this whole thing, but.
It's funny because
Thank you. But, we do have words from the Bible. I think it's also our own thoughts and our own protection on who we talk to. I do talk to my father, or I feel that I talk to my father, and hoping that he also protects me and stands by my side.
Little guidance from the outside.
A little guidance, and always asking for his guidance, just to watch out for me.
How about Lucy, Jim? What do you guys?
You can go first, Lucy.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll go after you.
I ground myself, and I also try to go with a clear mind. So I meditate, clear everything, especially, if you're having a bad day, you don't want to go into an investigation.
Right.
So I clear myself, I pray. Call on the guardian angels, wear my St. Michael medallion. And I do that before and after, because as Erik knows, I'm very, even before a case, even though I might ground myself at home, I'll go outside and need a couple minutes, and I'll ground myself again, and then go back in.
Right.
Because I think it's very important for protection, for you and anyone else that's near you.
Right.
So, like Lucy, I'm also Reiki 2 certified.
Oh,
So I ground
very good.
myself, and I do that to my wife. And I recently lost my grandfather last year, so I call on him quite a bit too. Yeah, we're pretty close. So it's some part of this is also hoping I can get a chance to kind of figure out how all that works.
Right.
Another reason why I'm into this as much as I am.
I think that's a huge thing, protecting yourself beforehand. There's a lot of groups out there that don't do it. I mean, I don't know personally that they don't do it, but I would assume a lot of groups out there probably don't do it. They go in for the thrill.
They don't.
And they don't think of the repercussions on the back end of it.
Well, I don't think they look at it in a spiritual nature. It's more of, okay, let's go see what we can find, and hopefully we get the Holy Grail or whatever. You know what I mean?
We didn't really do it in the beginning either, until I think it really confronted us.
Yeah.
And, we've been on a few now that has been questionable, so it's...
Well, I'll tell you right now, we were totally ignorant in the beginning. No idea about protection, or we didn't. The demonic wasn't a big issue at the time, even though it was out there. But we hadn't come into contact with anything until Father Bob stepped into the picture, and then that was it.
A lot of people always ask us, especially homeowners. They always ask us, or just people in general, do you ever bring anything home? Yeah, I would say I definitely.
I have. I've always been very. I even told Erik when I first started, because I've had experiences before I joined. So to me, I always had to ground myself, especially seeing the negativity. I've seen a lot of positive, but there's also negativity, and to me, it's very important because if I'm not there as a whole, I can't help the other person.
Right. It's a good learning experience, too. We did that case in Norton, and we do protections. We had Father Bailey with us, and we tell whatever's there. It's not allowed to come follow us home or otherwise. And, something still came, and it was not pleasant. And it's funny. I didn't realize what was going on. You think by doing this, you'd like, well, that's what it is, No. Not a clue. You think
especially when you have 3 car accidents within a 2-week time period, so you got to start questioning things just a little bit.
I'll get your eyes checked.
Well, unfortunately, it was with 3 different individuals in my family too. So one including myself, and they were all strange because we were all hit on the backside of our cars. We were all backed into, all 3 of us. So it was. You have to question things.
Well, we know the retaliation will come from a lot of different angles, whether it be monetary, financial, health, family and friends. It's amazing. I'm not saying everything that happens that's negative is like the demonic causing it, but I believe there's a strong enough influence out there today that if you're seeing something, I think you can get a definite feel if it's not of the norm anyway. You know, there's a little something else going on that's causing this disruption in your life. Other than, I know this recent case you guys are doing is pretty intense, but is there any other single case or thing that you've witnessed or been part of that's really kind of blown you away?
Rhode Island Lighthouse was one of them, and then another case in Rehoboth. I'll start with the Rhode Island Lighthouse. We were preparing dinner. It was getting close to sunset, and the claims are that the lighthouse keeper back in the day, I believe his name was Charles Curtis, would wait for the sun to go down and raise or take down the flag, light the light. So we figured we'd throw a recorder up there. Now we weren't even ready for a full investigation yet. This was just one of those things. We just it's still early yet. Let's throw a recorder up there. So as we were coming down, and fortunately I don't have the piece with me. But it was extremely interesting because we listened to it maybe half an hour later just to see if we caught anything. Yeah. And this is a big, heavy hatch that you have to open to get into the lighthouse. And it takes a lot of force to just stick your hand up there and drop the recorder in. And you're up on a ladder, and I have a fear of heights, so we had I think it was Sarah that threw the recorder up there, and she's the strong one, so she went she went up there. But as we were already, I think, in on the second floor, we heard a child's voice that ended up on the recorder, and it really was extremely interesting because it was so clear. There were seagulls outside the lighthouse, and they were just chirping away, and all of a sudden they stopped dead in its tracks, and then all of a sudden you hear this voice, and it sounds like a child's voice. Now there were children that came to the island back when Charles Curtis was a lighthouse keeper. He had a daughter that stayed on the island, but she lived a very long life. Wow. But there was another child that came to the lighthouse during the summertime. Wow.
Eric, I'm sorry, I have to stop you, unfortunately. I want to hear the rest of it. I really do. We'll have to talk about it after the show. I just got the 2-minute mark. Okay. So, unfortunately, this is going to bring us to a wrap.
I'd love to have you guys back on.
Yeah, I think it would be great to have you back on. Maybe talk about one of the cases itself. So with that, that's going to bring another episode of Haunted Happenings to a close. I'd like to thank Eric, Lucy, Jim for being on. It was great to have you.
Thank you for having
us. And love to have you again.
Absolutely.
So with that, I'm your host, Jake.
And I'm Scott.
Good night.